We organised Speak Out Against Psychiatry outside the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and the point was to create a place where survivors of psychiatry and their allies could gather together and speak about their experiences, but to do it as a protest outside the college. How can we change things in the NHS? How can we change the way the state treats people who are mentally distressed, so that people are damaged a whole lot less and helped a whole lot more?
Yeah, I'm a founder member of a new group called Speak Out Against Psychiatry. A lot of people have had a very, very negative experience of being in a psychiatric hospital. These people have repeatedly been told that they're ill, that they don't understand, that they don't know what's good for them. We would disagree, and we want to bring these people together so they can share their experience in a supportive environment. And we did it outside the Royal College of Psychiatrists because we would hope that they would listen to all these people talking about how terrible the experience they've had of a system which is supposed to help them and make them better.
We're Speak Out Against Psychiatry. My name's John, and I'm one of the founder members. We feel that psychiatry causes more harm than good. I met a friend who was on 2.5 times the recommended dose of haloperidol. His eyes were rolling up in his head, he was shaking, he was hallucinating wildly, the drugs weren't working. He wanted to come off his drugs. I find out about them. I find out they don't work, they're dangerous, they're addictive. You come off them, you have withdrawal psychosis, they cause brain damage, they cause other problems. The modern ones cause diabetes. We've got a list of things they cause over there. Some people like them, about 1/5 of people. That's not a lot, and yet they push them all the time. Me and my friend Ali there, eating the banana, we interview people in the Mental Health Day Centre, and this is what we find. They've been on drugs for 20, 30 years. They play dominoes. They're isolated. I'll go, yeah, I want to help you. I'll try and understand. Eventually, people go, I'm going to look after myself because you cared about them enough. Peter Breggin wrote a book called Toxic Psychiatry. He asked his clients what helped, said, you cared about me enough, eventually I cared about myself.
I'm off all my medication and I'm working through it. My psychologist is listening to my experiences, my past trauma, something that wasn't done in the 4.5 years I was seeing a psychiatrist. I was discouraged from talking about my voices. I was discouraged from talking about my trauma, and now I'm working through it, and it's hard, but God, I feel so much better now that I'm off all the medication.
If you use the services and you're seriously distressed, they'll go, take the drugs. We want you on the drugs for the next couple of years. 2 years later, next couple of years, 10 years later, just keep taking the drugs. I don't feel very well, have another drug. Time and again we talk to people and we go, it feels like this is the first time anyone's listened to your life story about what it's like to be distressed, why you're distressed. About 1/3 of the people we talk to have survived childhood sexual assault. Some people have experienced family violence. The research shows people who have diagnoses of schizophrenia, mania, personality disorder, about 2/3 have recognisable trauma like surviving family violence and childhood sexual assault. Borderline personality disorder is like 90%. It's ignored, or if it's ignored, not ignored, it's dealt with really badly. Instead, take your drugs, patronising chat with a social worker once a fortnight telling you to do your washing up. I could go on. I'm angry. I'm very angry. My friends' lives are being destroyed. Really, they're being destroyed.
Yeah, I used to work as a mental health advocate for people who are detained under the Mental Health Act. I mean, the main thing I noticed about psychiatry is it doesn't treat people like human beings. People just seen as a collection of symptoms. The person is terrified at being locked up in a horrible environment where they're suddenly at the bottom of this massive chain where they've got all these people who have massive power over them, and to be in that really messed up power dynamic is really traumatic for people. So then they become angry, they become frightened, you know, they shout, they do things that anyone would do in that situation. It's completely normal to be angry and frightened, but then that's seen as even more evidence of their illness. So I just wanted to talk about one patient. There's a lady called Margaret. She was hugely guilty about having been on benefits because our society stigmatises people like that, and she'd become convinced that she was going to be arrested and sent to prison for benefit fraud because, you know, she was so depressed. She was thinking about this all the time. So she tried to commit suicide, and she was sectioned. What they did, they took her into a room, knocked her unconscious, and ran electricity through her brain. They gave her ECT, and she did not consent to ECT. Now, there's supposed to be safeguards in the Mental Health Act to say if the person doesn't consent, they don't have the ECT. But they found a loophole. Because she believed she was in prison, they said, well, she doesn't know it's good for her, she doesn't know it's treatment, she doesn't have the capacity, so they get someone else to come and sign a bit of paper, and then they can give it to her for a certain number of sessions, and the guy comes back and signs it again. And I saw, you know, she completely lost her memory. Every time I met her after the ECT, I had to reintroduce myself, explain who I was. At one stage, she became very euphoric because they'd damaged her brain so much. She was all happy and jumping around, smiling, which, who would do that when they're locked up? You know, it's not normal. I mean, and then they saw that as a cure. One of the psychiatrists pulled me aside and said, look, you know, you criticised ECT, but look at the results. It's worked really well. And eventually they gave up because she would become euphoric and then go down again. So I think they stopped the ECT eventually. Unfortunately, I lost my job because the charity I worked for lost that contract. So I don't know what's happened to her, but thinking about her is part of the reason I'm doing this, because that's just one story, and there's so many.
I went through the psychiatric system 36 years ago when I was only 17 when it started, and I got locked up for 2.5 years. And the reason I asked for help, which you think I was a criminal for doing that, is because I'd been beaten up and sexually abused by 3 members of my family. There was also mental cruelty and poverty and neglect. But psychiatry and social services decided to ignore that, called me a liar and a fantasist. Sorry, I was drugged up so much I fell unconscious on the hospital ward. My period stopped. I got manhandled by nurses, I got shouted at and threatened. I got sectioned twice. Both times they never told me they were doing it, what their names or designations were. I just had to guess. The second time was after I'd just been beaten up. This was when I was at home on weekend leave. I was in an adolescent unit where one of the staff said there's no such thing as rape. Isn't that great for survivors of sexual abuse? And I own my own home. I work very hard. I've never been arrested. I'm a law-abiding member of society. I have something to give. Why should I be stigmatised like this? As if I was a criminal. Real criminals in my family, they have got away with it. If anything, they've been justified by what psychiatry did, and they've gone on to abuse other people, and those could be your children, your grandchildren.
I was a perfectly successful businesswoman, and in 2005 my partner and I split up, and I was so traumatised about this. I went to a private hospital, but they can't section you from a private hospital, so I was sent to an NHS one, where I received after a little while I received ECT because I wasn't responding to the medication, which I shouldn't have had medication. I should have had counselling. I was sectioned for no reason. I had never been violent. I had never attempted suicide at that time. However, 5.5 years is what I've been in and out of hospital for. 7 attempts on my life with no therapy for that. So I went from being a businesswoman in 5 years to being, I couldn't even look out a window, let alone go in the street. They need to account for this.
I am an ordinary full-time London office worker, mother of 2 boys and carer for my sick husband. 2 years ago, after a year of personal disasters, I was told some devastating news and went into a panic. I was taken to the local mental hospital and without my knowledge was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I tried to escape from the hospital 3 times. Unfortunately, by trying to escape, I was considered more disturbed. The first time I tried to escape, that was the first day, they broke my right arm in 2 places and refused treatment for over 14 hours despite my pleas. The second time, they injected me against my will with a tranquilizer which knocked me out all day. And the third time, they started me on a regime of addictive tranquilizers and dangerous antipsychotic drugs, again against my will. Then a nurse threatened me with electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, electroshock to the brain, and said they did it all the time. I was terrified, as I knew it deletes part of your memory and affects your cognition. I would not wish my experience in that mental hospital on my worst enemy.
I'm here because I'm on a CTO, which for people that don't know is a community treatment order. And that's basically like being sectioned. They let you out of hospital, but you're still under a section. And you have to agree to take their drugs and to cooperate with whatever they want you to do. So I've never been violent. And the reason I'm on a CTO is that I wasn't complying with their treatment. Basically, they think I've got something called schizoaffective disorder, and I disagree with that. And they think that the answer is for me to take drugs, and I disagree with that as well. But unfortunately, at the moment, I have no choice because I'm on a CTO. Now, I know that this is actually against the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, which actually says, I forget which section it is, but it actually says that you have a right to refuse treatment. But under a CTO, you don't have that right to refuse treatment any more than you do if you're in hospital.
In response to the last speaker, who's been diagnosed with, quote, schizoid personality, who the fuck isn't schizoid under modern capitalism, where you're taught to consume and consume?
I was 16 years old when I became mentally and emotionally distressed. And my mum was freaking out about it and trying to get help from counsellors, CPNs, and nobody would help me. I ended up in hospital at 18 and written off as a chronic schizophrenic, and my parents were told that I was going to be brain damaged for life. I was put on a lot of medication, hospitalised, and basically like crap. 10 years later, I got back in touch with my parents and came off all medication, had a rebound psychosis. My mother then introduced me to a psychologist, and he helped me work through my emotional distress and came to the conclusion that I wasn't schizophrenic, I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. After a lot of counselling and a lot of support and people being with me and supporting me, I am now nearly fully recovered. People can do this, people can recover, okay? We're not written off for life and we shouldn't be. We can recover from these things.
And then the drug companies came along, and in the 50s they invented the first antipsychotic. After 6 weeks, people were calmer. After 1 year, they were no better than people who didn't take the drugs were better. People who didn't take the drugs tended to recover, and that's always been the way. The drugs have always calmed people down, some people, but stop them recovering. And they're always addictive, and they're always dangerous. People always respond better to social support and understanding, as we always have. We're social creatures. The drug companies make huge amounts of money. They're huge multinationals, so this is a capitalist problem because the huge companies have huge PR departments, so they sell the idea of biochemical imbalances to sell the drugs. And that's why we have these people making money but not helping people.